Welcome back. I'm glad you are with us. This is chapter 48 of Genesis, and I got to say, it's one of the more complicated ones. uh, it is one of the more impactful ones. So, we're going to jump around into some other places in the Bible so we can make some connections. We are wrapping up Genesis, so it's really important that we kind of understand the concept of what's happening, especially in chapter 48, because this is the cross-handed blessing. You may have heard about that, but this is what moves the tribes of Israel from 10 to technically 13 and then back down to 12, and it'll all make sense as we move forward, but it starts right here. This is where uh, so much of the Torah and Israel and understanding our place in it is really learned here, and it's set in stone here. The problem most of us have is we skip this part because the church doesn't really like this part. So uh, I will say this: if you work for a church or you're close to a pastor and you want to ask the pastor about this stuff, he's probably going to be irritated with you. But he probably also doesn't know a whole lot about what you're talking about. So give him some time to look at it and review it. I'm not saying pastors are dumb or anything like that. Most of them are way smarter than me. But if you don't understand physical Israel and spiritual Israel and the difference and the reason this cross-handed blessing makes so much sense, it makes the rest of it not make sense. So we're going to jump in. This is Genesis chapter 48. We're going to be here for a little bit, so grab a snack, grab something to drink. This may take a bit to explain, but we'll get there, I promise. So chapter 48 in the complete Jewish Bible, it says this: a while later, someone told Joseph that his father was ill. He took with him his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. Yaakov was told, "Here comes your son, Joseph." Israel gathered his strength and sat up in bed. One question, really quick. I know I get this a lot between why does it keep bouncing back between Jacob and Israel? Because although the name had been changed, everybody wasn't on board with it yet. So to make, like my son, I have a son that lives in Kerrville. His name is Jacob, but up there they call him Jay because he's grown and it's kind of gotten to that point. So he's about to turn 30 and he's just noticing that the people that call him Jacob knew him before. So that may or may not, I mean, his name's Jacob, but other than that's just a little note here. So here we go. Yaakov said to Joseph, El Shaddai appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me, saying to me, I will make you fruitful and numerous. I will make you a group of peoples, and I will give this land to your descendants to possess forever. Now your two sons, who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt, are mine. Ephraim and Manasseh will be as much mine as Reuben and Shimon are. Reuben and Simeon. The children born to you after them will be yours, but for the purposes of inheritance, they are to be counted with their older brothers. Now, as for me, when I came from Padan, Rachel died suddenly as we were traveling through the land of Canaan, while we were still some distance from Ephrat. So I buried her there on the way to Ephrat, also known as Beit-Lechem. When Israel noticed Joseph's sons and asked, Who are these? Joseph answered his father, These are my sons, whom God has given me here. Yaakov replied, I want you to bring them here to me so that I can bless them. Now Israel's eyes were dim with age, so that he could not see. Joseph brought his sons near to him, and he kissed them and embraced them. Israel said to Joseph, I never expected to see even you again, but God has allowed me to see your children too. Imagine that. You didn't think you were going to see your son, and then you got to see his sons, your grandchildren. Then Joseph took them both, Ephraim in his right hand towards Israel's left hand, and Manasseh in his left hand towards Israel's right hand, and brought them near to him. But Israel put out his right hand and laid it on the head of the younger one, Ephraim, and put his left hand on the head of Manasseh. He intentionally crossed his hands, even though Manasseh was the firstborn. Then he blessed Joseph. The, the God in whose presence my fathers Abraham and Isaac lived, and the God who has been my shepherd all my life long to this day, the angel who has rescued me from all harm, bless these boys. May they remember who I am and what I stand for, and likewise my fathers Abraham and Isaac, who they were and what they stood for, and may they grow into teeming multitudes on earth. When Joseph saw that his father was laying his right hand on Ephraim's head, it displeased him, and he lifted up his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head and place it on Manasseh's head. Joseph said to his father, "Don't do it that way, my father, for this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head." But his father refused and said, "I know that, my son, I know it. He too will become a people, and he too will be great. Nevertheless, his younger brother will be greater than he, and his descendants will grow into many nations." Then he added this blessing on them that day: "Israel will speak of you in their own blessings by saying, 'May God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh.'" Thus he put Ephraim ahead of Manasseh. Israel then said to Joseph, "You see that I am dying, but God will be with you and will bring you back to the land of your ancestors. Moreover, I am giving you a Shechem, shoulder ridge share of Shechem, basically, uh, more than your brothers. I captured it from the Emori with my sword and bow." So there's so much in this chapter, and I get that it's a little long, but uh, it's also one of those translation chapters, which is why I read in the Complete Jewish Bible, because some things it says in the New Living and some of the other translations just doesn't get the point across. But so Jacob recites the Abrahamic covenant. That's what all of this is based on. That's what the land of Israel is based on. That's the most important covenant God's made, and Jacob was the last of the patriarchs. He's blessing the kids and doing all these things. So the Hebrews will become very numerous. We'll see that in the next book, obviously, but and they'll become what's called a kahal amim, and it's a holy convocation of fellow countrymen. The Hebrew is kahal amim, and it means a group of people all focused on one thing, a convocation. We've all come together to work towards one thing. I'm generalizing, so cut me some slack there if you know Hebrew. Uh, and they will be given the land of Canaan as an everlasting possession. So he's repeating that covenant, what God said. Luz is just another name for Bethel. And Shaddai is related to a word in Akkadian, which is what the original Hebrew dialect was. We don't know a whole lot about it, but it basically means mountain. So El Shaddai likely means God of the mountain. This was the mindset then too. Gods lived high up in the mountains. That's just what everybody believed. That's what everybody thought. We like to say they live above the clouds, but that's not really the thing either. It's a way we conceive it. So Israel adopts Joseph's children, and he didn't just make these children Israelites, he made them on par with his 12 sons. He made them equal. He elevated their status. So Jacob made Ephraim and Manasseh sons. He made these two Egyptian children, not adopted grandchildren, but he made them his own children. I have 7 grandchildren. If I adopted one and gave them my last name and elevated them, that's just a legal procedure. And that's basically what he did here. So let's see here. Studying this will help you explain, too, why you've had such an interest in Torah and Israel and learning the Bible. If you've thought to yourself, like in the last few months or the last couple of years, I've just really had this push towards God's Word. Chapter 48 is why. Let me explain. See, the church has basically tried to ignore God's plan that in order for the Gentile world to be saved, we must be grafted into the spiritual heritage of Israel. That's the only way we can take part in their covenants, is to be grafted into them. The church has forgotten that the family of God is Israel. It is not the church, but We say that sometimes. What makes the church is that Gentile believers have been grafted into the covenants of Israel, not instead of Israel, but alongside them, with them. It's not about physical Israel, it's about spiritual Israel. Those are two different things. Physical Israel is the land, the people, the government, the establishment on the map, so to speak. Spiritual Israel are God-fearers who believe in the Messiah, Yeshua, and follow God's rules and commands. That's basically that simple. So from Abraham forward, God made a provision that Gentiles, if they gave up their pagan gods, could join Israel. He made an allowance for that. It was not only allowed, but you were expected to. Hey, if you want to honor the God of Israel, this is how you do it. If you want to really follow him, give up your gods, repent, turn, and move towards that. I'll quit pointing at the camera. That seems weird, but you probably don't watch the camera the whole time. Hopefully you just listen to this, because I would imagine that would become annoying. Anyway, so no distinction was made between naturally born Israelites, Hebrews, or those born outside of Israel, Gentiles. Once you join the spiritual covenants, I may not stop pointing at the calendar, but once you joined, gave up your pagan gods, and accepted God's laws and him as your God, there was no difference. You had all the rights and everything of everybody else. So outside of becoming part of spiritual Israel, there was and remains no other way to have a relationship with God. The only reason we can even know about Jesus is because of spiritual Israel. He was born in Israel as a Jew, Jewish parents, in a Jewish place. So he brought the word out from Israel, from the Jews. Then, because most Jews rejected the word, which is Christ, he is the word, he gave the job of spreading the gospel to Gentiles because they didn't really do it. So, see, God created this whole circle. And what he wants to do is he created physical Israel, the Hebrews, human beings called Hebrews, to bring the knowledge of the one true God to people via the laws and commands, the Old Testament, that's all that existed, to the world. And then once that didn't work, they didn't do it, he brought it out of Israel to us to go tell the world about it. And then when we've spread the word enough and we've gone all over the world, he has us take the word back to the Jews. The Jews accept the word, who is Christ, and then they're saved. That's how that works. And in this way, all of Israel is saved. It's just one big circle. Now, somebody out there is probably screaming at the radio or the phone and going, but how do we take the word back to Israel? They're never going to listen. It's hard enough getting Gentiles to listen. It's going to be really hard to get Jews to unlearn stuff. But here's where we're going to tie it all together. Let's jump over to Romans 2, and let's see here. See if I can get in the right chapter here. Okay, Romans 2, verses 26 through 29. It says this, and if the Gentiles obey God's laws, we're the Gentiles, won't God declare them to be his own people? In fact, uncircumcised Gentiles who keep God's laws will condemn you Jews who are circumcised and possess God's laws, but don't obey it. For you are not a true Jew just because you were born of Jewish parents, or because you have gone through the ceremony of circumcision. No, a true Jew is one whose heart is right with God, and true circumcision is not merely obeying the letter of the law. Rather, it is a change of heart produced by the Spirit, and a person with a changed heart seeks praise from God, not from people. So that's Paul trying to explain what he's talking about here. He's using the word Jew in place of Israel because that was the common language. Everybody was a Jew essentially at that time because that's all that remained in Israel. But we notice Paul says we should follow the law. How many modern Christians, pastors even, me included, have said we don't have to worry about the law anymore? But Paul, who most of the church thinks more of than Jesus sometimes, says we should follow the law. Paul says that in order to be a true Jew, a true Israelite, you must be a spiritual Israelite. He says it doesn't matter whether a person is circumcised, uncircumcised, a non-Jew, or a Jew, because God's definition is the condition of one's heart, not our flesh. Spiritual Israelites are the only residents of the kingdom of God. So today, believers are not taught that when we're saved, we become citizens of spiritual Israel. No one ever mentioned, I'm 54 years old, I've been reading the Bible my whole life. I just realized that about a year or two ago. No one had ever mentioned it to me before. But we do. We become part of spiritual Israel. In Paul's day, Jews were trying to require believers to become part of physical Israel by being circumcised because they didn't realize it was about spiritual Israel. Now we meet another part of the plan. One of the effects of this adoption by Jacob is that the firstborn blessing was assigned to Joseph. See, he's bypassed all of that, went to the youngest, which is Joseph, by blessing his two sons. By making his sons his own sons, they were entitled to a full share of all the wealth and authority equal to their brothers, the other 12 tribes of Israel. So removing Joseph as one, and this will get complicated, but stay with me. So removing Joseph as one of the tribes and replacing them with the two sons means you have 13 tribes. We will resolve it, but it happens later when Levi, 450 years after this cross-handed blessing, is removed from Israel as God's set apart priest for his tabernacle. We'll see that in Exodus. So Jacob blessed the two boys with an important blessing on Ephraim, who was the youngest. That blessing meant that Ephraim was to be a blessing to all nations, which means Gentile nations. Not Jewish nations, but all nations. That's the only people they called nations were Gentiles, because you were either Hebrew or a Goyim, which is the nations, the other people. So about 4 centuries, the Israelites will be free. And they had approached the promised land, but due to a lack of faith and a rebellious attitude, God drove them back out into the desert for 38 years. So fast forward 40 years, the Hebrew tribes are ready to move on Canaan and take the land. Let's take a look at Numbers 34:1. It says, Adonai told Moshe, which is Moses, to give this order to the people of Israel. When you enter the land of Canaan, it will become your land to pass on as an inheritance. So the moment Israelites crossed the Jordan, Canaan became the property of the Israelites forever by God's decree. So did God give the land to Israel? Yes, that's in Numbers 34. If anybody has a question for it, tell them to read 34:1. Don't argue with people about that. It's a waste of time. So number 34 occurs about 450 years after Genesis 48. So between Jacob giving his cross-handed blessing and Numbers 34, almost 5 centuries will pass. So this is also a good reminder, it takes a while. Don't get impatient waiting for God. Whatever his plan is going to happen. So only 12 are to be considered Israel. Only 12 were given territory. Levi had been removed from Israel at this point, and God in essence adopted him away from that tribe away from Israel to be his own. So let's jump to Isaiah 8:11 through 16. Is that right? Yeah. Isaiah 8:11 through 16, and it says this. For this is what Adonai said to me, speaking with a strong hand, warning me not to live the way this people does. Don't regard as alliance what this people calls alliance, and don't fear what they fear or be awestruck by it. But Adonai Zavaot, consecrate him. Let him be the object of your fear and awe. He is there to be a sanctuary, both for the houses of Israel. He will be a stone to stumble over, a rock obstructing their way, a trap and a snare for the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Many of them will stumble and fall, be broken and trapped and captured. Wrap up this document and confine its teachings to those I have instructed. So this passage points to something happening today. Modern Israel believes the source of their trouble is men. They think it's all the people that surrounds them. So they try to negotiate peace. Isaiah is told not to believe as Israel believes, not to fear as Israel fears, nor is he to fear who Israel fears, nor to react as they react. And he's telling them that. They're not all listening. We don't listen, they don't listen. So treaties between Israel and the Palestinians are not what will decide the future of Israel. Never will. There is one person who is going to solve the Middle East, and that's Yeshua of Nazareth, Jesus the Christ. He's the one that's going to be able to explain it all. They're not going to get it any other way. So let's jump to Jeremiah 33, 23 through 26, and it says this. The Lord gave another message to Jeremiah. He said, have you noticed what people are saying? The Lord chose Judah and Israel and then abandoned them. They are sneering and saying that Israel is not worthy to be counted as a nation. But this is what the Lord says. I would no more reject my people than I would change my laws that govern night and day, earth and sky. I will never abandon the descendants of Jacob or David, my servant, or change the plan that David's descendants will rule the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Instead, I will restore them to their land and have mercy on them. So God says at the end of that verse 26, it says, I will restore their fortunes and will have mercy on them. Because of Israel's mistrust, sin, and rebellion, they will have consequences, but God's mercy will endure forever. So Hosea 7, you may have not even read the book of Hosea, but it's a good book. I want to heal Israel, but its sins are too great. Samaria is filled with liars. Thieves are on the inside and bandits on the outside. Its people don't realize that I'm watching them. Their sinful deeds are all around them, and I see them all. The people entertain the king with their wickedness, and their princes laugh at their lies. They are all adulterers, always aflame with lust. They are like an oven that is kept hot while the baker is kneading the dough. On royal holidays, the princes get drunk with wine, carousing with those who mock them. Their hearts are like an oven blazing with intrigue. Their plot smolders through the night. In the morning, it breaks out in a raging fire. So when this scripture was written, Ephraim and Judah had become two separate nations, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, basically. The tribes of Judah and Benjamin formed the kingdom of Judah, and all the other tribes formed the kingdom of Ephraim, or as our Bibles call it, Israel. So after King Solomon died, Israel split in a civil war. The people of both kingdoms still thought themselves as Israelites, kind of like in the American Civil War. We would have considered ourselves, Americans still. So the kingdom of Judah is dealt with separately by God. We'll see some of that. So if we jump over to Hosea 8, 7 through 9, it says this. They have planted the wind and will harvest the whirlwind. The stalks of grain wither and produce nothing to eat. And even if there is any grain, foreigners will eat it. The people of Israel have been swallowed up. They lie among the nations like an old discarded pot. Like a wild donkey looking for a mate, they have gone to Assyria. The people of Israel have sold themselves to many lovers. So foreigners will swallow up most of Ephraim, Israel. Now, these 12 tribes are among the Goyim, the Gentile nations. So they're spread out all over the world now. And they're basically being assimilated. Some of them are staying separate, but most are being assimilated. Less than 5% of its population actually remains. All the others were scattered, assimilated, intermarried in the Assyrian Empire when they came and took them over. The assimilation was not forced. They wanted to be free from the requirements of the Torah and the law of Moses. So God accommodated them. He gave it to them. He gave them what they asked for. So within a few generations, most of the Ephraim Israelites had no idea their ancestors were even Hebrew. They didn't know. They thought this was normal, kind of like we do today. Judah was not attacked by Assyria. They made a treaty and paid tribute in exchange for remaining separate. 130 years after the northern kingdom of Assyria of Ephraim, Israel failed, though, Babylon, led by Nebuchadnezzar, he attacked Judah. So once they got a little ways, they went the rest of the way. The Babylonians didn't scatter Judah. They did deport a large group, but they were not assimilated. They were allowed to stay together as a group. And this is key to really maintain their culture. Because remember, all of this is oral. They don't have anything written down yet. So they got to maintain this culture. Most wanted to stay separate, and we don't do that today. We try to blend in with the world. I want to fit in. I don't want people to think I'm weird, dress different, wear my hair different, or act different. Jews were completely, and still are to this day, a lot different about that. Ephraim, Israel wanted to be like the Gentiles, so God granted it. Judah didn't, so they didn't have to be. Okay, so let's see. Thousands were left as caretakers of the land, mostly peasants because they could do that. Persian and Greek influence began to spread, and Babylon lost its grip on the Middle East. Jews were the only people from the former nation of Judah, but after Babylon, they view themselves as a remnant of all Israel. They think they're the only ones left now. So if we go back to Genesis 48, 17 through 19, again, real quick, I'll read that for you. It says, but Joseph was upset when he saw that his father placed his right hand on Ephraim's head. So Joseph lifted it to move to Ephraim's head, from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. And the reason was because he was not doing the blessing right. He was doing the youngest instead of the oldest. So the Hebrew words of this prophetic blessing Jacob pronounced, our Bibles say that the group of nations, the original Hebrew is Milo ha-goim. These words mean a fullness of Gentile nations. I'm going to make you into a fullness of Gentile nations. So in 1200 years after this cross-handed blessing, Ephraim was scattered and absorbed by the Gentiles of the world all over the place. So at least some of this prophecy has actually happened. So let's jump back to Paul in Romans 11 through 26. It says this, but did God's people stumble and fall beyond recovery? Of course not. They were disobedient. Disobedient to what? Oh, God's law. This is Paul talking in the New Testament. I'm not talking about Old Testament. So God made salvation available to the Gentiles, but he wanted his own people to become jealous and claim it for themselves. Now, if the Gentiles were enriched because the people of Israel turned down God's offer of salvation, think how much greater a blessing the world will share when they finally accept it. I'm saying all of this especially for you Gentiles. He's talking to us. This is Paul. God has appointed me as the apostle to the Gentiles. I stress this, for I want somehow to make the people of Israel jealous for what you want, for what you Gentiles have, so I might save some of them. For since their rejection meant that God offered salvation to the rest of the world, their acceptance will be even more wonderful. It will be life for those who were dead. But some of these branches from Abraham's tree, some of the people of Israel have been broken off, and you Gentiles, who were branches from a wild olive tree, have been grafted in. So now you also receive the blessing God has promised to Abraham and his children, sharing in the rich nourishment from the root of God's special olive tree. But you must not brag about being grafted in to replace the branches that were broken off. You are just a branch. Replacement theology means nothing. We did not replace Israel. So let's wrap this up. So at the appointed time, the Jews are going to wake up. A remnant of the Jews are going to wake up and see that the Gentiles had what was intended for Israel and become jealous. And then Paul says the Jews will learn the gospel from the Gentiles, who originally learned from the Jews. And in this way, all Israel will be saved. And who is all Israel spiritually? Believers, Gentile and Jews, God-fearers, believers in Jesus the Christ, Yeshua of Nazareth. I know that was a long one, but I promise it's important. Let's do it a couple of times if you have to. Give me your questions, comments, anything you want to know. I'd be happy to help. God bless. Love God, love people, and change the world.